Welcome to Beyond the Pulse, your go-to podcast where entertainment meets education through the lens of sports science. I'm your host, Nikolai, and in today's episode, we'll go through the fascinating world of sports science, sports psychology, physical and mental health, the holistic approach, and much more, cutting-edge science that can help athletes for the future. So we have a very special guest today on Beyond the Pulse, and we welcome a renowned sports psychologist, sports scientist, leading researcher and advocate of the holistic approach, and keynote speaker, Afke van der Wouw. So Afke, thanks so much for coming today, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction.
Yes.
I have to say, I'm not a researcher though. I did some research to graduate, but I'm not a researcher at the moment. So.
Keynote speaker and advocate of the holistic approach.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we met a couple of months ago, and we had a very nice first discussion about exactly this field that you're in. So maybe you can tell the listeners what you do.
What I do, yeah. Well, I started out as a physiotherapist, and while working in sports, I noticed that it's not just the muscles and the joints and things that you can use to perform. But because I was always there, always at the practices, always at the competition, I noticed that also anxiety, for instance, thoughts, emotions, communication, concentration, all play a very important part in performance. And I got curious, and that's why I started Human Movement Sciences here at the Wouw. And I took the main course, sports psychology. And that's how I became a sports psychologist. I worked with different teams, professional football level, international level, but also in other sports, tennis, golf, well, all kinds of sport. They come into my private practice. And on Wednesdays, I work in Wouw performance coaching with my partner, Yara. She's also a sports psychologist. And we're based on the KNVB, the National Football Federation campus. And I also worked with the National Under-19 team, but next season I will be the young team from the women's team.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and also in other sports like hockey, handball, water polo, I worked with teams as well. So it's always nice to be a coach for the coaches, coach for the team, and a coach for the individual player.
Yeah. And do you have to adapt your way of communication when it comes to speaking with athletes, with the coaches, or do you just give general information about?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's an advantage of me being a former physiotherapist. For me, it's easy to talk with the medics, the physician, the physiotherapist. I can speak in the medical language, yes, so to say. If I talk to the coaches, because of my human movement sciences, we can have about training physiology very easily, but also, of course, how to integrate sports psychology into the sports practice, which is a very important part as well. It's not just having one-on-one conversations in the room, it's a part of the performance. So how can you integrate that into the daily practice? Yeah. So I can discuss that with the trainers. And of course, if you have like workshops or individual talks with players or with athletes, of course, it's good to know a little bit about the culture of the sports itself and the rules of the sports itself, but also to talk in their language. I always make the comparison with me being a physio. I had to learn every part of the muscles, of the bones, and everything in Latin. But when an athlete came to me, of course, I have to translate it into normal Dutch to explain what he has in his knee, for instance. Yeah. And same goes with sports psychology. We can use all kinds of terms, but it should be really in easy Dutch that also the athlete can comprehend, can understand.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a crucial way for everyone to benefit from this type of perspective. Yeah. And I think something I struggled with in college tennis was this lack of togetherness when it comes to what should I do to improve my pain in my legs, or if my well-being wasn't so up to scratch, then this type of communication was absent, I felt.
Yeah, and you can see that the different fields all are at their own department. You see, there's a sort of a separation between mental and physical, which is, in my opinion, not possible. That's why I have the holistic approach. For instance, when somebody gets injured, a lot of times there's been a big life event a couple of months previous before that injury. And they even did research, and they could tell that the stress, the amount of stress was piling up and towards the injury 3 to 6 weeks before the injury actually occurred.
Okay.
So then you have like a physic injury, but actually it was already, you could already tell because the line of stress was going up. And with all kinds of things, and I think Descartes used to separate those two, and we still have in medicine world and in sports world tried to separate this, like physical is for the trainers, mental is for the sports psychologists, but there's not a line here, and it's one integrated holistic thing, and you have to approach it like that. You have to train it like that. Yeah. Even performance, if you want to have a good performance, it's not just strength, muscle strength and condition and ball handling. It's also how to deal with setbacks. It's also how to deal with pressure. It's also how to concentrate for all those minutes. It's also about communication with your teammates. It's all those things, dealing with different circumstances. If you're behind, and all those things are a part of performance. You need to perform well on those as well to perform well. So we have to train them as well.
Yeah, and actually that's a very good point to raise. At what age do you think this is something that you should start teaching athletes, and maybe from a junior level? Because at a young level we want to enhance ball skills, coordination, hand-eye coordination, the physical ability to move, but it's so lacking to also develop these coping mechanisms, the way to deal with stress, to go through difficult situations excited to perform and not be scared or nervous about it. At what age do you think it's something that coaches should be preparing athletes for, this psychological aspect?
Maybe just right away when they start performing. Because if they come in a certain age where they're just going to matches and competition and performing, then you should prepare them for those matches. Yeah. And the part of the preparation should also be those aspects. And I think nowadays stress is not just in sports, but in general it's a big thing. And a lot of people don't have the right coping mechanisms to deal with that. So if you can learn youngsters already, and of course another way is you do adults. So you have to translate it again into children's languages. But for instance, a breathing exercise that can be very easily taught to youngsters as well. Or visualization techniques, they probably even be better visualizing because they're still daydreaming a lot, yes. You know. So, and if you learn that from a very young age, they already are familiar with that. So it's much more easier to also implement that in when it's needed.
Yeah. So would you say then from grassroots level?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the sports, when on which age they start competing, really competing. Okay. So I cannot really say a certain age, but as soon as they start competing, then I think it should be part of the preparation, of the training. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, very good. And I think a nice segue into that then is to discuss what is actually the holistic approach. What type of elements do you see fit to be included in this? Is it just a very general, broad perspective, or are there certain characteristics or traits you can look at and say, this is what you need to?
Well, of course, it also depends on the type of sports. So what that sport actually needs. For instance, communication amongst your teammates is very important, but it's maybe less important if you're an individual player. Of course, you communicate with your coach, but it really depends. A lot of things depend on the sports, but there are also some genetic things. So I think you should really see at the sports what's being needed. So maybe dealing with different circumstances, how can you deal with that? Or concentration, or dealing with setbacks, and how to focus. And that can be practiced on the pitch just during normal exercises. Maybe, for instance, dealing with pressure, what you should make it as game-like specific as possible. And nowadays, or former days, when people wanted, for instance, to train the penalty kick, they just had a bag of balls, like like loads of them, and they just kicked it, just all of them to the goal. Then, it went pretty well. That they trained the penalty.
Yeah.
But the fact that the penalty is not just the kick itself. I mean, everybody can kick the ball probably to score in the. But the fact that it's being done under pressure, that's the difficulty. So how can you build in the pressure into that practice? And you can do that by, for instance, giving everybody just one chance, like it is in the game. And especially if you have penalty shootouts.
Yeah.
And then you create two teams. And after every practice or after every game, they're gonna have the two teams competing with penalty kick shootouts. And if maybe you in team A and you lose your penalty or you don't score, then your teammate needs to go running around or need so there should be a consequence about it. So if you have a consequence, or a couple of months ago, I was with the football team, and if he didn't score the penalty kick, he had to crawl from one pole to the other pole on his knees, and everybody was laughing. Wah! So, and a lot of trainers would say, okay, well that is a kind of pressure, but it's not the same amount of pressure as you have in a full stadium. And so that's correct, but it turns out of research that's not really necessary. If you bring in the little pressure, like if you miss, you have to crawl on from one pole to the other, and people are watching and staring you from both teams, then it's already enough to learn you how to deal with that pressure. Yeah. And it's already enough to build in a routine, a pre-shot routine, which golf players also have a lot. And a pre-shot routine or pre-penalty kick routine, that's already consisting of a lot of practice you can do, which is, for instance, breathing exercises or breathe out before you want to kick. Do your visualization, see it in your mind's eye before you actually kick it. And you have to train that visualization along the week as well. And also external focus. So focus on the point that you will actually want to score, not at the goalkeeper. It's like, I'm not hoping it's going to be at the ball, because then you're going to look at him, and then you sort of are attracted to him as well. So external focus to the point where you want to score. So things like that, and it depends on the person, but you can all learn that. And breathing out and doing breathing exercises needs to be practiced on the pitch if you take the penalty, but also along the week. Yeah. And that's also a stress management tool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how you said the external focus, because I've experienced this myself in quite tense situations on the tennis court. You are maybe 5-all, deuce point, or in the tiebreak, and it's third set approaching. And if you start to think about your body movement, you start to deteriorate. Your arm gets super heavy. It's like you're Thor, and you can't hit the ball in. You start to panic. You feel the heart rate increase. But as soon as you start focusing on where you want the serve to go, where the next shot should be, and less so much on yourself and more the direction of the game, it aids for mental clarity. You're a lot more calm and focused, and the output is so much better. Yeah. So I've definitely experienced this firsthand. And I used to play football as a kid as well, and I love to score from halfway. Like my favorite club is Liverpool, so I used to be a Steven Gerrard fan. Okay. And every time I would get the ball on the halfway line, I would try to shoot for goal. Yeah. And I used to love visualizing this the night before a game, but that was a good 20-odd years ago. So. Yeah. But now tennis is my predominant focus. Okay. But yeah, I completely agree. The external focus is something, and the coping mechanisms is crucial, even in everyday life. I think non-athletes as well face these types of problems where something becomes overwhelming and they don't cope with it in the correct manner, and there's a spiral effect. And then there's this whole loss of normal functioning, sort of homeostasis, if you will. And to get out of this rut sometimes is very difficult. And then there's this phase of hypercompensation to get to where you used to be or feel better. Then there's a dip again. So I think it's crucial to be able to learn these types of stabilizing factors so that you can live in a constant upward trajectory, hopefully. Of course, there's always ups and downs, but... Yeah,
it's also for recovery. I mean, it should also be a part of recovery. If you look at recovery now, we're just running around on the pitch and we do maybe a little bit of stretching, but that's it, you know. But if you really want to recover well, of course, you need enough time to recover between the games, but also the quality of that time is really important.
Yes.
And the quality is also difficult nowadays because we're never out. We're always on because we're on social media with our phones. We're watching things, we're hearing things. We don't really completely relax very well. So relaxation exercises, breathing exercises, and you can see a lot of athletes, LeBron James, Djokovic, they're all doing meditation. Kobe Bryant when he was still alive. So you can see that's all a part of their daily routine in order for stress management, but also for good recovery as well. And they also see that if you can look at injuries, usually you have a lot of injury prevention programs, but they're all focused on coordination, on strength, or mobility, stuff like that. But they forget the stress management. And stress is a huge part of getting injured. So why not put that also into part? So it's injury prevention, it's better for recovery, and it's getting you more stable. When the pressure is on, you're so familiar with all these kinds of techniques to really manage your own stress that you can actually do that and make it part of your routine and use it very easily when time's needed.
Yeah, and you mentioned recovery as a key framework for performance. Yeah. And I myself, I'm also a tennis coach currently. Okay. And a lot of the kids just do not have any knowledge about how to do passive recovery, how to do active recovery. It's all go, go, go. And then, their quad is too sore and they cannot play for 2 weeks. Yeah. Or their calf gives out, or these kind of elements. And what we wanted to do with the Academy is to try and install some recovery techniques in place. So definitely stretching and foam rolling, elastic band resistance with a bit of stretch as well. And relaxation, some meditation techniques. And it's helped them so much. And it's difficult to convince them of how much it's helped them without asking them, and they are aware of it. So what we've started to do is do it twice a week, and a day and 2 days later we ask them how they feel about it, and they actually feel, wow, I feel so relaxed, I feel so good, and then you leave them to it just to see if they do something about it, and no, they forget, they don't feel like doing it. You ask them how they are again, and they're terrible, the worst feeling in the world. And it's difficult to convince a youth player especially that this is the right way to do it if you want to progress. So how do you think how can you convince someone? I used to have this problem as a kid as well, where my dad would tell me something useful, I would do it, and then as soon as they're not looking, stop doing it. So how do you convince a child that this is something, well, maybe not just a child, but
well, I think it's easier if coaches are aware of those things, and if they really integrate it into their schedule of the week, especially if you look at professional athletes, if they come to the club, maybe in the mornings and they leave in the afternoons, they have practice, you have watching previous games, you have discussions with the coach, but also make those relaxation exercises, visualization or yoga or meditation, make it a part of the schedule. Then they have to, and they experience that for a very long time, and then it's part of their routine, and then they probably would miss it when it's left out. Yeah. As soon as they experience how good it feels when they're doing it, and of course they need a little time, so that's why it's needed for a coach to put it into the daily practice. But we used to have the same with the warm-up. Nobody did a warm-up, and now everybody does it. And even in football, I can see in youth football, I can see in the warm-up they do a sun salutation, which is a yoga stretching kind of pattern things. Yeah. They probably don't know it's yoga. They don't have to know it's yoga, but it's like, okay, well, it's beautifully integrated into the warm-up now. So the next step will be the cooling down, not just running around the pitch for 2 blocks and then it's done, but also to see how to really relax the body. Actually, you've got the sympathicus and the parasympathicus, the nerve system. Yes. And the parasympathicus is for recovery. Yeah. And the nervus vagus, it's very important that. And there are a lot of ways to stimulate that nervus vagus. And see how you can put those exercises to stimulate the part. So as soon as they get off the pitch or they go out and go home, they're already into the parasympathicus stimulation kind of phase. So then the recovery can already kick in.
Yeah, it's very interesting how the body has a system where it switches from on to off and using the recovery versus flight or fight response. So yeah, I think
But the off switch is very difficult for people to find nowadays.
For me as well.
Yes.
For me as well.
Yeah.
I struggle to sleep quite a lot, and I think there's also this element of if you don't do it consistently enough, it catches up with you where you drop for quite a few days, and this recovery is so necessary that all your other functions or all your other systems don't function as accordingly as you want.
Yeah.
So I've actually experienced this as well with the help of Pulse and what we do. For myself, I noticed that if I sleep poorly, 2 days later, there's always this lag of 2 days where my mood is terrible and I start to feel very fragile and I start to eat poorly. So it's an official trend of my own now that I make sure that the second day after sleeping very badly or a low quality sleep, that I make sure I've got the good habits in place. And I'm aware of it, so that's something that's so useful as well.
Yeah.
Because before you would just trudge along with your boots on, with your trench foot, and you just keep hustling. But it's important to realize that.
And that's also a very important part of sports psychology. It's self-reflection, getting to know yourselves, getting to know the other person that you have to perform with or your coaches. So. And that's already something I would start in the season. There are a lot of questionnaires where you can look for the personality of the person, but also reflection on the game. And coaches should also help, especially youngsters, to reflect on things, because then this part of the brain, it's the precortex is fully equipped when you're like about 23 or something. And this is a lot to do with planning, with reflection, with things like that. So if they're youngsters, they have some more trouble doing that. So you should do it in a very easy way and sort of make it a build-up. But reflection on your patterns, on your behavior, especially when you talk about dealing with setbacks during the game, you should use, for instance, planned disruptions during practice. So if you use planned disruptions, like maybe if you're a referee at a certain game, you whistle for the wrong things or the wrong reasons, or you say to the athlete, okay, do this sit-ups for 20 times, and as soon as they enter 20, okay, do 10 more. Yeah, but you now it's at 10 more. So things like that, and different circumstances. For Max Verstappen, when he was a kid and he was driving and it started raining, everybody would go in, but his father just pushed him out. And this is good, because now you learn how to drive in wet circumstances. And nowadays he's still very good at it. So planned disruptions are very important to learn how to deal with setbacks, different circumstances or things like that. But the most important thing is, if you do that in practice, they're probably not going to like it. So you're going to get the death eye stare, like you told me. Then that's very important that you talk about it. What just happened? Well, you told us to do this, and now you say that, and that's correct. And how did you behave? What happened? Did you give up, or did you get into a conversation with me? Or, for instance, if you were a referee and whistling for the wrong way, probably they will come to you again and again. That wasn't a good ball. That was for. And you could say it took you like 5 minutes before you actually went on with the game. What if this happens in the game? Your teammates will lose you because you're still in talking with the referee. He's not gonna. So the reflection part, so to say, is very important, because that's the learning part. If you just do the planned disruptions or put under pressure and don't talk about it afterwards, then they probably see it as a lousy training or not so fun training. So the self-reflection and the personality, getting to know yourself, getting to know your body, which is also very important. Sometimes I'm amazed with professional athletes, for instance, about breathing. They're asking, where is your breath at now? So my breath? What do you mean? What, is it more in your lower belly? Is it more up here? I don't know. So they don't really sense where the breath is. And usually when you relax, the breath is more in your belly, and when you're a bit uptight, it's more up here. So they need to be aware of the difference, and they need to learn how to bring it back down. So body awareness starts managers also learning where the tension is and let it go. And you can do that by doing breathing exercises, by doing relaxation exercise in different kinds. You can do a body scan, or you can do contract and relax the muscles. And you can do that with audio. I just, for the Olympic team, I audio taped it all for them. So now I've got all audio files. It's on the website. They can just get it off and listen to it. They can do it themselves, especially after they did audios for several times, and they can do it themselves after a while. And meditation, which, like I said, that a lot of professional athletes use that as well. You can do that with audio, but you can also do that themselves. And Djokovic also calls it conscious breathing, that you're aware, just focusing on your breath. So there are a lot of things. Visualization. A lot of athletes do so, like you told me the night before the game. But then it's not really visualization, because visualization is really a training technique. So you need to do that like almost every day or every other day to really get the brain cells into the right place and get well connected and get a strong connection. So you need to repeat that. So you can either do that at home in your bed or on the couch, or you can do that also on practice if you make it part of your routine. So pre-shot routine for golfers, a pre-serve routine for tennis, pre-penalty routine, all kinds of routines, and that you learn athletes to also do that, build it into the routines. So these are some practical tools that people can use.
Yeah, so these are some of the solutions for coping and being resilient and having a successful outcome. But let's talk about a little bit some of the symptoms or what kind of things happen that an athlete would then have to cope with mental health, or what exactly is mental health and how does it differ so much from well-being? Is it the same thing, and is it more of an acute state? Is it more of a chronic state? And can you talk about this a little bit?
Well-being is getting more and more important. You can see in the professional clubs in England, they even have like 2 full professionals working only on the well-being of all the players. I think the coaches need to be included in that as well, because they have a very high workload as well. So I see it more as well-being, and well-being is everything. So well-being is, how do your muscles feel? Are they very tensed? How are your thoughts and emotions? Do you have a lot of thoughts and a lot of negative thoughts? Or maybe after the game you're still in bed and you think the game over and over and over again in your head. And because of that you get a lot of anxiety in your body. So your body's still into a action mode actually. So the sympathicus is still on, and that's why you're probably not easy to get into sleep. And if you fall asleep, you probably get a little restless kind of sleep, not a very high quality of sleep. And because you have less sleep and you come the next day on your practice, you're not recovered enough. So you go with less recovery, you start with the next practice. So you're not fully recovered, you're not really, supercompensation didn't kick in at the right amount. And that's why your focus is probably less during the practice. You probably are easily distracted. You're probably tired earlier. The right and the left brain, they don't really communicate that well. So you probably missed the overview as well. So you see that back in practice, which is like for injury, more injury risk. So you see, that's all integrated into each other. And same goes if you, for instance, have like a big life event in your life, or if you're a youngster, your parents are divorced, or you go to a different club, you make a transfer. A lot of times you see when an elite athlete makes a transfer to another professional club, that they pay lots of money for him, and they come to a new club and he doesn't perform that well. And everybody's like, wow, what happened to the guy? He was so good in his former club. Why does he didn't perform well? But they forget that besides the probably higher level of football he has to play, if you look at football, it's also the fact that he has a different environment, that he goes to another club, sometimes another country, another language. He's probably somewhere alone in his apartment because his family or his is not there. So there's a lot of loneliness as well. And his whole life is just football because he doesn't have a lot of social time, because he doesn't have any social people to do that. So then you see that's all integrated into each other, which all takes a lot more energy. If you're homesick and you don't feel that well because you're missing your next of kin, then it takes more energy. You recover less. It takes you toll on his performance because you don't perform that well that you used to play. Then you start thinking more about why it's not working. Why I just want to perform so well. I have to show these people that I'm worth it, and so then you get all these mixed up. And you see well-being. You can see it in the performance eventually, and you can see maybe you have injury as well. Then it's physical again, but it already starts with all the things before that.
Yeah.
So it's all integrated, and it should be. Clubs should be aware of it, because if you only look at money-wise, you have like less money. You paid him a lot of money, but it's not worth it because you didn't give him enough guidance. Yeah. It's not enough to just give him an apartment and a car and the way to the supermarket and the way to the pitch for the training. That's what I noticed when in the Netherlands we also get a lot of athletes outside the Netherlands, from Japan, from Nigeria, from Portugal, and they just got an apartment and they were just sort of stuck there, and there wasn't any extra guidance in these guys to feel well, and when they feel well, it's easier to perform well.
Yeah. Well, this is a very interesting point, because there is a lot of movement around the globe now when it comes to athletes and crossing borders and these kind of things, and it is still stigmatized that the athletes' well-being is something that should be really looked into. I think still in modern sports there's a lot of this linear behavior of physical health is number one, or at least being able to perform on a physical level is number one. So how do we change this to make it more understandable, the grave consequences that arise from not being able to take into consideration this well-being? And how do we make sure that all sports benefit from this type of approach, or this feeling that the well-being comes for maybe even above just what physically the athlete is capable of?
Yeah, because he can only be capable if the circumstances are right. Yeah. Well, it depends on which people. For instance, if you talk to athletes or to coaches to make them aware, I usually take the supercompensation model. And I just draw the model. Everybody knows that model. You have your practice, you take energy, it takes energy, and you need time to recover and to eat and to sleep and to rest. And then you get more energy, you super compensate your energy level in your muscles. And everybody knows that the training part is the one thing that costs energy. And then I'll ask the athlete, but is it just the training that costs your energy, or are there other things in your life that cost energy as well? And it depends on their lives. It's like, I have to go to school and I have to go to work, or I have a little child now because that takes a lot of energy, and say, okay, and these are all nice things. Are there maybe some more difficult things that cost energy as well? Well, divorce, or I have a lot of trouble in my relationships, or things they come
tax.
up. They got also got financial troubles, all the kinds of things come up. And of course, if I talk to an athlete, already knows some circumstances, so I try to maybe move towards that point. Okay, so then the line of taking energy of the practice goes down more deeply, because that also takes energy. Okay. So if you go down deeper, then you also have to recover for a longer time to get to the compensation, supercompensation.
Yeah.
And now if you look at the recovery upward line, you have to go deeper, so it's going to be a longer line. But also, how is your recovery? What do you do in your recovery time? And we talk about that. And obviously lots of time they go gaming, or they're on the laptop or on their telephone, and so is that high quality recovery?
Right.
Or so now not really. So the line not goes that steep; it goes more shallow like that. So it takes even more time to recover, you know. And then they start to realize, and because if you didn't recover properly, you already go down and you go downwards all the way.
Yeah.
And you could just draw it on the scratch board. And it's like, oh my God, yeah. Okay, now I understand. Okay, but how can I improve the quality of my recovery? And there you go. Then you can talk about all kinds of things. And how you, and also to trainers, it's very good to talk about all the things that takes energy. So if you look at your athletes, what might be the case? Maybe if you have youngsters, nowadays we're in the exam period. Exams take a lot of energy. So what do you do with the amount of training? Maybe you can put it down. For instance, I had an example of a athlete who was in a divorce. And the trainers would go, yeah, just go to Afke. She's about those stuff. Just talk to her, you know, and they would go back to practice. Yeah. But the first thing I did was going back to the trainers, like, okay, this guy is in a divorce, takes a lot of energy. So what do we do with the amount of training? And they decided to put the afternoon training out of his schedule in order to give him a sort of balancing out the weight. Yeah. So that's a talk you can do to the trainers as well.
Yeah, I think that's crucial, and I'm not sure that enough trainers get this type of feedback of the necessities required to be able to provide this environment for the athlete, because I think it's quite obvious that it's not only your physiological abilities, your muscles and physical capabilities, then it comes to your mentality that affects performance, your well-being, and the environment you surround yourself is very much influential in how you cope with everything on a daily basis. Yeah. And if this environment is not structured in a way to really allow you to flourish, and each person's flourishing capacities are different, as well as the non-flourishing, and the needs. Yeah. So I think it's important to be able to provide this type of tool or awareness to all sports cultures, if possible.
So the education of coaches is also very important. So if you educate coaches, it's not just about training schedules and exercises, but it's also to have that part. So it's that part. How do you train the things we mentioned before, the under pressure, the setbacks and stuff like that. So how can you train that on the pitch? But also the part of well-being. How can you provide a very safe environment for your athletes? They can really feel themselves worthy, seen, known, and also have some talks with your players very often to see what's going on in his life. Yeah. And it can be one-on-one talks like we do now, but then it's really official ones, like, oh my God, coach wants something of me. Or you could just walk beside him when you walk off the pitch, just like, hey, how are you doing? Yeah. And how is it at school? How's it at work? How is it at home? And so just the small talks are also very important. You just keep in contact with your players so they know, what the big life events might be, what the energy takers are in his life. Yeah. And, I didn't know that was, is that so? And then you can talk with the others and maybe to the physiotherapist. Of course, he's also very connected to the players. He hears about a lot, because when he's giving the massage, also a lot of stories come up. So the multidisciplinary team is also very important. And to talk about every player, okay, this is him, this is going on in his life, so what should we do with the training amount?
Yeah. So also actually a follow-up on this then, quite clearly it's important for the culture to be right, but that in no way does that mean soft. Right, so sometimes if we think of mental health, there's a stigma to it that you need to be, soft and kind, and this undertone of weaker, let's say. And so, how is it then important to establish a culture in which there's still this high need for this competitive edge? At the end of the day, if you're a football club or an individual athlete, the outcome you want to achieve is to be winning, and this is still a very primary need for athletes. So how do we then involve this culture of, let's say, this more aware and relaxed undertone to then still keep this competitive edge?
Yeah. Well, I think actually if you want to perform very well at a high level, you need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Nicely said.
Because playing at such a high level, it is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You'll get tired, you will get sore muscles, you will get defeated, you will get cards, you will get not being on the team, and all kinds of things. They're very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The pressure is uncomfortable, the setbacks are uncomfortable, the playing time are uncomfortable, tiredness, emotions, thoughts, everything is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you need to train your athletes to get them comfortable with the uncomfortable. How can you do that? By putting them in uncomfortable situations.
Okay.
And that is, for instance, plant disruptions,
Yeah.
or that is very severe trainings. So it doesn't need to be soft. And if you put them in uncomfortable situations, you get them out of their comfort zone. Of course, you have to do it just like training your muscles or your condition. You don't go like this far out of the comfort zone. You take them a little bit out of the comfort zone and let them adapt to it. Let the muscles adapt to them. Let the thoughts and emotions adapt to it. Let the circumstances talk about it. That's why reflection is so important. Talk about the game. Talk about it with each other. And not just what went well and you should a little bit go to the left, you to the right, but also about the frustrations, the irritations, the communication, all kinds of things. Reflect on that as well. And have enough time to let them digest everything and adjust to it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not soft, because you get them out of their comfort zone and you're looking for ways to get them out of their comfort zones. I do it regularly, but not too long or not too far away.
Okay.
And then the boundaries are getting...
you expand the capacity that they are able to cope with.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but then that then draws the question of, okay, if you are constantly making these disruptions more difficult, at what threshold is it? How do you know that the athlete is able to cope with what you're providing? Do you have to look at a training load? Do you have to have history of working with the athlete? How do you really find this balance without overstepping the ability or capacity?
Yeah. Well, it's also good to monitor a lot of things. So you can also, of course, a lot of people, you're also monitoring a lot of things. So you can monitor the way they slept, but you can also, the subjective training load is already also very important. So a lot of trainers only look at the objective training load, so the amount of kilometers they will be running, the heart rate, the acceleration, stuff like that. But that doesn't really say how heavy it was for the athlete.
Yeah.
So you should also ask for the subjective. You can just give a number from 1 to 10. How heavy was this training, and what made it so heavy? Or as also competition. And also recovery. So how well did you recover? How well did you sleep? How fresh and bright do you feel at this moment? And if you feel there's a change in that, then you probably, if the change is for too long time, for too long, then probably you have done a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Or it was too much for that certain athlete because it was also combined with some private circumstances.
Right.
So you should, if you look at training load, you should also look at the total load of that day or of that week. What was the total amount of load that you put on the athlete, but also the athlete himself or the circumstances around him?
Yeah, and this is very difficult for a coach to be able to really see. If you have 50 athletes and you have to ask each individual athlete all these different types of elements of questions per day, I think your brain will explode. So it's not possible. So I think exactly something like this is what's lacking and where Pulse actually is trying to make a difference in sport, in being able to monitor exactly these objective and subjective measures together, get this integration of load, and be able to prescribe a recommendation for not only the athlete but the staff in general. So the physical, the mental coaches, the counselors, and these types of elements. Yeah, that's a great point. The integration of variables is crucial for.
Yeah, and also to give them tools, like for instance, if you look at the subjective training load, or they can see they didn't sleep well, or quality of sleep wasn't well enough, it should also be nice for them to have their own tools which they can use to improve that.
Yes.
So that they know the way to meditation techniques, breathing techniques, relaxation techniques, visualization techniques, all the things we were discussing, that they can see what works for them, because there's so many tools. You can go on YouTube, on Spotify, they can all be found there. So pick a few, try to integrate it into your daily life routine and see if that works for you.
Yeah.
And then you not only have like the numbers and figures on what went well and what didn't went well, but you also have the tools, if it doesn't go well, they can change it into the right direction.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to ask you, a little bit related to perhaps the mentality, but more related to high performance. So it's quite common to see athletes reach their peak, but only able to sustain that peak for a very short amount of time. A great example is in tennis. There's a lot of, especially in the women's game, they are able to reach quite a high dominant peak for about a year, maybe two, maybe a few Grand Slams, and then they just fall off the cliff and no one hears of them again. Stuff like this exists also in football, where, of course, you mentioned the well-being surrounding a transfer and things change the athlete. But why is it that, or what are the commonalities or traits that occur within an athlete to reach this level and then all of a sudden drop off? Is it more mental?
Well, you probably heard about flow.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of athletes want to be in flow, because if they were in flow, everything goes by itself. They're really into the game. They're really concentrated. Time looks like it's passing by. They don't feel that much tired. They're really into it. It turns out that the big chance of getting into flow, because it's something passive, you cannot put it on or off. You really have to slide into it. It's got to do with, on one hand, the goal you're having, and on the other hand, it's your capacities. And if that's a little bit in line, then you go into flow. So if your capacities and the demands or your goals are sort of in balance. And if you have been playing not so good, or you're still growing, then you're sort of in underdog positions. So your expectations are not that high yet. And as soon as you start to win things, you start to win a Grand Slam, or you participated in that, then your demands from yourself as a player, but also the people around you, are getting higher and higher. So they expect more of you instead of the previous ones. And if you have that, then you come a little bit more in the upper part. So you don't feel like you're capable of doing that much of that high quality of work, and the demands are higher. So then you get more into the stress zone.
Okay.
And the stress zone, usually, you need a little bit of stress to perform well. But if you have too much stress, then your performance goes down. Yeah. So it's got a lot to do with expectations, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Okay.
And also, if you look at tennis, if you performed at a high level, you get more tournaments, you get more invited, you play more. So recovery is less, and so you are also more injury prone. And also the pressure on the games is also higher if you perform higher.
Right.
And if you have more pressure, it takes more energy as well. So the game itself takes more energy. You play more games, you play more tournaments, you get less recovery, and that's why you sort of drain out your energy level as well. Might drain.
Yeah. So if I get this correctly, it's like an expectancy thing versus stress mechanism and coping about it. There's also this interesting research which suggests that if you praise based on outcome, that the athlete is likely to deteriorate because of it rather than the effort performed. This is, I think, also in adult level and as well as in junior level. And do you think this also plays a factor in?
They did research also at the tennis games, where in the finals, on the one half of all the games, they put this, how do you call it, the cup. When they would win the game, they would win the cup. Yeah. I also guided a tennis player, and he said, well, in my tournament, there was a car standing beside the court. Yeah. And if I would win this final, I would win the car. Yeah. So then people are very much attracted to the end result. But the more you get busy with the end result and the consequences of that end result, of winning the game, the winning and losing, then you're lessly focused to the actual task. Right. And your task is should I play this ball, how should I play the ball, and where the external focus we were referring to earlier. So that also might be the case in combination with the higher demands on yourself and others around you, and not the underdog position anymore. Yes. In combination with too much result-orientated, or on winning and losing, instead of being focused on just your task and the information you need to do the task well. So that's the choice. You need information, so you need to look, you need to feel, you need to see, you need to hear. Yeah. And then you need to take decisions, and then you have to execute that decision. Yeah. That's really being busy with your task. Yeah. And then you play at your best. But that's getting more difficult when you, for instance, have the cup or a car standing there, or if you have been into Grand Slams and then you say, I have to win this because people expect me to win it, so now I have to. And then you start more winning and losing oriented.
Well, just to add on to that, I think Djokovic said something really interesting in an interview where he said exactly this. You have to be present in the moment, and the best players are able to come back from when they lose focus on this quite quickly. So the better of an athlete you are is not based on your physical or mental strength, but how quickly you're able to bounce back from adversity. So a bit of resilience in that sense.
And he says also that you can't be in the present during the game all the time. Right. So if you notice that you're going into the future, or you still think about the fault you made, the ball earlier, that's fine, he says. Accept it. Yeah. But bring yourself back to the present, to your task as soon as possible. And said that recovery time, how long it takes for you to get back into the present and get back into the task-oriented modus, that's the difference between the good ones and the very good ones.
Yeah, and the late, great Kobe Bryant also said that, just what you said earlier, that if you're result-oriented, it's likely that you're distracted on the wrong task. So you're not focusing on what's present in the moment. So it makes perfect sense that your external focus should be on your task and not on the outside environment. And,
not into the future. Yeah. Because of course you get distracted by the outside environment. You've got these circles of concentration. It's got 5 lines. The first one is the center. It's the one that's you and your task. Mm-hmm. The second one is getting distracted by the surroundings. The third one is getting distracted that you're busy with the former ball. I should have done this, I should have done that. So you're busy in football they call this the grief moment. You're grieving too long. The fourth is focusing on winning and losing. The fifth is focusing on the consequences of winning and losing. And the sixth one is like, oh my God, what am I doing here? Can I just stop here? Say, this is worthless. Oh man. Then so these are the 6 ones, and you can imagine that the first one is the best. So first you can recognize all those circles, recognize the where your focus is going, and like Djokovic said, recover and bring yourself back into the center of that circles of Ebersprecher. Yeah. So and that's also training. And that's also something that coaches can train you in. For instance, Max Caldas, he was the former coach of our national field hockey team, women. Mm-hmm. He is from Argentina himself, and they had to play the World Championships in Argentina, and that will end up in the final. That was a pretty big chance to play against Argentina as well. So he knew a little bit about the crowd, what's going on there. So he wanted to get them familiar with that noise. So what he did, he had, when we were still in the Netherlands, he had a competition. He made he invited another team to play against them. I thought it was a men's team. and he put these big sound boxes next to the stadium, and he put it there, the crowd of Argentina in that, and he put it in high volume, and he just put it around the field, and they were like shocked, and it was that loud that they couldn't reach each other, so they couldn't communicate with each other. It's like, and he was like, yeah, deal with it. That's just how it's going to be during the World Championship. And it was like that, and they ended up in the final, and they did win the final because they already trained to get familiar with the sounds, but also to communicate in other ways, maybe non-verbal communication and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they didn't get that distracted by the circle two, the circumstances, for instance, the noise of the crowd.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Mikel Arteta, Arsenal's manager, did exactly the same before they played Liverpool.
Yeah.
Because the Anfield crowd is so vocal and it's deafening when you're playing, that they also had to put up big speakers to cause the stress and this planned disruption to force the players to be able to cope with this type of external pressure.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very good way to. Do you think this is possible for example, tennis academies or youth level to install this type of pressure with external booing perhaps, or is that taking it too far?
Well, it has to be sport specific. I don't think there's a lot of booing going on during tennis.
No, but if they pick a player they prefer.
Yeah. Well, I have that one. I went to the US Open and Nadal had to play against a German guy, and the sixth set was like 6-0. So it was obviously that Nadal was way much stronger.
Yeah.
But the crowd wanted to have a game, so they started to cheer up the German guy. And the second set, it was like he just won the first game, and the crowd was, yeah, you can do this, man. You can do this. And he was like that, the German guy. And all of a sudden, he got energized, and Nadal got irritated. You could see he got frustrated because everybody was sort of against him.
Yeah.
And he lost the second set, I think just because of that. Yeah. And then the third, he just won, and he recapped himself, and the other sets were easy going for him, and he fine because he was stronger than the German guy. But it's just one whole set because all the crowd was going for the German guy instead of Nadal. Yeah. So it can really interfere your performance. You have to deal with that. But so you should also make it sports specific. So look what's going on in your stadium, or if your crowd or your circumstances, or because sometimes the weather is very big of influence in certain sports, but other ones are playing inside and just have a swimming pool or something, so there's nothing much different about the sort of circumstances. Yeah. But sometimes also the climate. I remember the national field hockey team when they had to go to the Olympics in Beijing, which is another culture, another city, another atmosphere, another environment. So they went a year before they actually had to go to the Olympics. They had their training camp there, and they used the exact training spot, and they used the same hotel. They watched the environment where the Olympics should be. So they're already familiar with the traffic, because traffic is hell there. Yes. So they had even though the kilometers were not that far, but because of the traffic was so bad that they had to get used to that as well. So there was the traffic, but the climate as well, the pressure, the moist, how do you call it, in the
humid.
air? Yeah, the humid, yeah. So all those things, the body should be, the thoughts and emotions, how to deal with that, all got familiar. So the second time they went there, when they find the Olympics were there, they were already used to those circumstances. Yeah. So they weren't that distracted. And they were comfortable with those uncomfortable situations a bit more.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, very good. So I wanted to ask you about your opinions on how the attitudes towards mental health in elite sports have evolved over the years, and what direction do you think it should be taken into in the future?
Well, you see, more and more athletes are more open about using sports psychology, going to a sports psychologist, or having one in the team, but also to parts of sports psychology, for instance, mindfulness or meditation. I think Phil Jackson, as a basketball coach, did a very good thing in there, just by letting all those athletes meditate and basketball players still use it. And like the Kobe Bryant and the LeBron James, if they talk about it and people see that, whereas meditation, first of all, in earlier days, it was seen as something you do with a spot in the middle of your eyebrows and go sit like that. And, for those kind of people. Yeah. But if you see those big athletes, tough athletes, saying they use that, Djokovic's talking about it, and that really helps. So these role models really help in involving it. And you see also, I think athletes are a bit more vulnerable as well, telling about the difficult parts of being an elite athlete as well, the pressure they're on, the tough times they had to go through. So opening up, they call it in sports psychology normalize. It's get normal. I thought I was the only one had to deal with those pressure, or I thought I was the only one dealing with these circumstances. But if you hear other athletes had to deal with that as well, also injured athletes as well. Yeah. You have a lot of injured athletes clubs nowadays, so they can talk about what you're going through being injured. It's not just your knee, for instance. It's not. I mean, the physiotherapist, the medical, they all have attention for your knee, but how do you deal with it as a person? Yeah. If your ACL got torn, you're 11 months or so, you're out of practice, and that does something to you. It's a big life event itself, and how do you deal with that huge setback? And to talk about that with other athletes really helps. So I think and hopefully in the future it's going to be more integrated, even more integrated in the practice on the pitch. It's going to be normal, even more normal to talk about it and to go to sports psychology, to use sports psychology, and also in the rehabilitation of injuries as well. And I think also you can see there is not just a lot of pressure for athletes, but also for coaches. So there's also more awareness for coaches, how the pressure they be on and the amount of workload they have, and also in their education, that it's not just about giving tools to athletes about stress management and stuff like that, but also to give it and to teach it to coaches so they can practice it themselves, because they're on a high pressure as well. And a lot of times they don't have the right stress management tools or tools to deal with that pressure. And also they don't have a lot of recovery time, just like the athletes. So how can they bring in more quality in their recovery as well? So I think that's going to be more of the future as well. So it's going to be more put in education of athletes on the clubs or a national level, education of the coaches for themselves, and also in the use of athletes.
Yeah. Maybe can you also touch on what is it about opening up to someone else and being vulnerable that helps someone alleviate some tension that they feel? For an athlete, for a coach, if they're dealing with this type of stress, what is it exactly about opening up to someone that really helps?
Yeah, you can see, if you look at a person, you can compare it as an iceberg. And iceberg, when it's into water, you probably see the 10% of the iceberg on top of the water. Yeah. But there's so much beneath the waterline. And if you compare that with athletes, you only see the exterior of the athlete. You see the great goals he's achieved. You see the attention he's getting from the journalists. You see this great car he's driving. You see all these big results that he's having. And that's the thing we see. But below the waterline, we don't see what it cost him to get there, and the things he couldn't do, the things he had to do. If you want to win the prize, we call it, and if you want to win the prize, you have to pay the price for it as well. Yeah. And we often don't see the price they're paying for it, because that's underneath the waterline. Yeah. And if they show a little bit of that, they show they have to pay the price they have to pay for it, then you see, it all looks so easy, but I see you're also having trouble doing this or that. Yeah. And that makes it a relief for a lot of athletes. Yeah. It's a relief to know that others having also difficult times, and that they also, even though they had difficult times, they were able to get to the top.
Yeah.
Whereas other things, I'm getting difficulties, so now I'm never going to make it, or now I'm injured and I'm never going to be back at my own level. But if they see other ones also experiencing tough times, but still get to their old level, that also gives you hope. So it's giving relief and hope for the future.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I think we can start to close things off. Afke, thanks so much. But before we leave, I would like to play a little game with you, or at least get a topic that we haven't discussed before in the podcast. And I would like to know some favorite sports moments that you've encountered, maybe a couple to show of interest that you remember very fondly.
Yeah. Well, I remember the first professional football club I was working for as a sports psychologist was VVV Venlo. And we were playing at the first league. And I still remember the game that we had to play, and we won, and we promoted to the highest league there in the Netherlands. And that was, and it was not just at that moment. We worked with the whole team through the whole season, and we were together so close with the staff and with the athletes. And for me, it was new because it was my first sports psychology experience, being part of the staff. For the coaches, it was new because I never worked with a sports psychologist.
Yes.
And with the athletes, it was also new to have a female in their staff and also to have a sports psychologist. So, and the way we worked together and working towards that, and then that final day that we just won and got promoted, that was that was a very memorable moment. Yeah.
I can imagine the celebrations must have been
top
notch.
Yeah, that was very nice to all experience that, and so many people celebrating it with us. But especially the feeling that yes, we did it. It was really like a we feeling.
A team effort.
Yeah, really team effort.
Yeah. I think that's crucial for all sports. Even if you're stuck in an individual sport, there is always a team around you, and this element of we did something is always a little bit more special than the personal of I did something special.
Yeah.
But congratulations for that.
Well, it's a long time ago, but it's still remember it.
Great.
Okay, yesterday. Yeah.
Do you have any other memories that you'd like to share?
When I was way back younger, that was the European Championship with the national football team in 1988. Yeah. And I was very small, but I was big enough to understand what was going on, and we had the Gullit, Rijkaard, and Van Basten trio. That was awesome.
Legends of football.
Legends of football, and they were working together, and I can still remember they're sitting on the bench and doing like this and having, I can still see the picture for it, and everything was orange. The Netherlands was orange. Everybody was orange.
Yeah.
So that was also great experience.
That's fantastic. That actually sounds very similar to my 2010 World Cup experience in South Africa. Yeah. I was also just old enough to remember how crazy the atmosphere was, how everyone from different countries was coming to our little village and training in our schools and these kind of things. I actually watched the Netherlands play Korea.
Really?
And Wesley Sneijder scored from outside the box the most insane goal, and the whole stadium just lit up.
Was that one with the head?
No. He scored a volley from outside the box, and it curved into the top corner. It was just unbelievable. And I think it was still the group stage, maybe round of 16 perhaps, but I know that the Dutch had a very good run in that year. Only to be taken away by Iniesta in the last 5 minutes of extra time. But it was something that lives quite strongly in my memory as well as a kid. Yeah. Well, Afke, I think today we were very grateful for you coming, and we really appreciate all your insights and expertise on this topic. And if you would like to share with our listeners some information where they could find your types of audios and books, that would be...
Yeah, we're still working on translating it all, so be patient. But if you go to leren.nl, presteren.nl.
Yes.
I'm not sure, but we will all write it down so
Yes.
people can see it. And lerenrevalideren.nl. Those are the two books I've been writing for. So for the Dutch people, you can also read it. And you can find audio files on that site and videos, interesting videos also in English. So there's an English flag you can push on. I wrote an article for the British Journal of Sports Medicine, a holistic approach on sports injury. That might be interested if you're injured. In injury prevention, also in injury rehabilitation. And we also have a podcast with some injured athletes, and also in English-speaking injured athletes. Let's see if I've got some more. Well, I think that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for your time again. And we have a little special gift for you afterwards.
Curious.
Yes. And so that's all for today on Beyond the Post. Thanks so much for joining us in the complex world of sports. And we hope you found today's discussion interesting, entertaining, and that it added value to your athletic pursuits. And follow us on your preferred platform. We're up to date on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And for the next episodes, we will be talking to some very interesting professional athletes, former athletes, and we hope that you enjoy this series and stay tuned for more good things to come.